official sign system. So their system signed with English grammar. Just a little background, gestures are supportive to language. They are not a standalone language. I can't go to a store and convey an entire message to someone or have a very complex, long conversation with someone. I just can't. But I can describe things. I can say, wow, that thing was so big, or look over there. And those are kind of things, those are different gestures called deictic and representational gestures. Our deictic gestures are pointing, showing, giving. A lot of times, if you look at little babies, when I was researching this, I started watching little kids going, oh, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing this. You see kids pointing at things all the time. They're using these deictic gestures to explore their environment and learn new vocabulary. Or they'll come up to you and be like, look at this. Or they'll be like, hey, help me out, help me out. These begin even before they start talking. This is prelingual communication. So as you were talking about, they're learning to communicate with us through gestures early on, even before they start developing those first words. And it continues. You'll notice I'm standing up here using gestures as I talk. We keep using these as we grow older. Then we have representational gestures. These are a little bit more complex, and they're a bit more cognitive in nature. So these are gestures that actively replace a word. They have a function as a word. So in this here, this child is using what looks like cake. He's learning how to sign cake here. A good example is if you think of a little kid who's still learning language, they might point to something and then they might go, yeah, hey, and you go, oh, you're looking at a bird. They're using that flapping arms to represent what they don't know yet. And as you can see, it starts around 12 months of age when they're starting to use their first words. Then if we go back to the complex languages, we have natural sign systems. These are what you were thinking of with ASL. They are their own language. They are not derived from spoken language at all. They do not have similar characteristics. They have their own grammar, their own phonology system, their own vocabulary. They have slangs and idioms. One of my favorite ones that I learned when I was taking sign language as a course is train all gone. And it basically means like, I'm just totally zoned out today. I can't do anymore. So it's its own idiom. And this doesn't translate into English, just as an example. There are natural sign languages all over the world. There's American Sign Language, Norwegian Sign Language, Arabic, British. This one is a French Sign Language seen only in Quebec. So they're universal, but they're all different. They are their own languages. So I could learn American Sign Language and not be able to use it if I go to England, because England has its own kind of sign language. Then there's that big middle chunk of different sign languages. These are systems that are used primarily for education purposes. So they're kind of a mix between using sign language symbols and putting it into English formats or English grammar. So if I think of an example from sign language, I might say, over there, woman, she beautiful, but that wouldn't translate if I said it spoken. So using these artificial systems, I can say, over there is a beautiful woman, and I'd change it into English. But they're not necessarily independent languages. Here's just a list of some of the artificial sign languages that have been developed over the many years to be used as an educational form, particularly with children who are deaf and hard of hearing, but they can also apply in these early interventions that I'll be talking about later during the presentation. Quick note on fingerspelling. I put this in the artificial sign system because each of the 26 letters represents something that is in spoken English. But it can often be used in the deaf community or with an ASL to represent English words, similar to how we might borrow taco from Spanish because it helps represent a word that may not be existent in sign language yet. It often is accompanied with speech reading. So you were talking about people speech reading in sports. They might pick up on that because they could be like, oh, they're using an A there. And finally, we have Pidgin Sign Language, which is more recently referred to as contact signing now. At this point in my career, I would consider myself a contact signer. My proficiency in ASL is not as good as I'd like it to be. So sometimes I can use ASL grammatically correct, but a lot of times I need to borrow from English and put it in there. So this is also used very often for educational purposes. And baby sign language. You mentioned baby sign language. This is a very similar, it's a kind of contact signing. So basically we take ASL signs and we simplify them. We make them really easy for babies to understand. We're going to use simple language, things like mom or dad or all done, and make it really easy for them to use. We don't expect them to be using complex grammar seen in ASL, that's too difficult, but we may introduce it as a way to support what they're learning. So as we're talking to them, we could say, oh, you have a cup, are you thirsty? And we can implement that and maybe give them some visual cues.